Okay, we're live. Hi, this is William Ramsey. Welcome to William Ramsey Investigates. On tonight's show, a very special guest. His name is Dr. Phil Fernandes, and he published a book back in 2009, which I just read through. The title of that book is The Atheist Delusion, a Christian response to Christopher Hitchens and Richard Dawkins, two very well-known public intellectuals. But he has also written other books. The title of those books are The God Who Sits Enthroned, Evidence for God's Existence. Also, No Other Gods, A Defense of Biblical Christianity. Also, God, Government, and the Road to Tyranny, very timely book. I think I have to check that out. Contend Earnestly for the Faith, and also Theism versus Atheism, the Internet Debate. He's also contributed a chapter to The Big Argument, Does God Exist?, edited by John Ashton and Michael Westacott. That's not a very total read-through of what he has written. He's also done a 25-volume lecture series on Christian subjects, which you can find on Amazon. And Dr. Fernandes, also honorably served this country, the United States, from 1980 to 1983 in the United States Marine Corps. But we are going to talk about this book about two people who I followed. I was very familiar with Christopher Hitchens, and Richard Dawkins has been around. But Dr. Fernandes did an excellent job of addressing a lot of their positions and views in this book, The Atheist Delusion. He'll talk more about that. So, Dr. Fernandes, are you there?
Yes. How you doing, William?
I'm doing great. Thanks for agreeing to the interview. For people who may not have heard of your background, also your website is Phil Fernandes with an S at the end, philfernandes, all one word.org. For people who haven't heard your name, can you talk about your background and what led you to write this book, The Atheist Delusion?
Yeah, I was rather a skeptic myself when I joined the Marine Corps back in 1980, and one thing led to another, and through a search for meaning, I found Christ. And then I tried to answer the objections of fellow Marines, and so I got into apologetics, and I planted a church in 1988. We're still going as a church and doing well, but I continued to do apologetics and debated on college campuses like Princeton and University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, and Washington State University, University of New York, and so I started doing debates back in the late 1980s, throughout the 1990s, and still take an occasional debate now and then, normally against atheists and all. But when the new atheists came on the scene, and that was after September 11, 2001, it's really interesting because Christian scholars warned people about the very violent strand of Islam, militant Islam, yet the new atheists just lump together Christians and Muslims and act like 9/11 was caused because of a fanatical group of people that believed in God, and Christians are often fanatical about their belief in God, so they saw 9/11 as an evidence against Christianity as much as evidence against Islam. And so that's what got started. And the main thing that makes the new atheist is not that they're using different arguments or that they're more philosophically profound than previous atheists, but it's just that they were much more impatient, and they basically there was much more emotion involved. It's kind of like they're arguing that God doesn't exist because they hate him so much. So it's a real contradiction there. If you don't believe God exists, why do you hate him? And Richard Dawkins would compare belief in God to being as silly as belief in the flying spaghetti monster. Well, Richard Dawkins hasn't made a dime lecturing or debating against those who believe in the flying spaghetti monster. He's made an awful lot of money writing books and debating and lecturing against the true God of the Bible. So it seems to me that his analogy is a really poor one. And but whatever the case, that impatience, it was like these guys had a desire. Look, let's rid the earth of Christianity and belief in God, and we'll enter into some kind of utopian state. And so that's why Richard Dawkins referred to teaching children about God as child abuse. Now, we want to see child abusers locked up. So Dawkins doesn't come right out and say it, but he's implying that it's so dangerous. If you're going to teach children about God, you ought to be locked up. And so it was that kind of emotional, impatient response, that desire to rid the earth of Christianity and theism itself, belief in God. That's what kind of characterized the new atheist. Now, I would argue that they actually lost that battle. They succeeded in enlisting a lot of people to oppose belief in God, or at least to oppose traditional religions. But where they failed, they were surpassed by more of a postmodern, neo-Marxist, neo-paganism. That's why I looked at the list of books you wrote about, and I think that they're much, much more relevant than just your basic refute atheism type arguments. Right now, we're in a battle for Western civilization, and I believe that atheism, the new atheists, they had their decade, and they're on the way out. We still need, this book is still important because we still need to defend God's existence and the bodily resurrection of Christ and salvation only through him. We need to defend biblical Christianity. At the same time, right now, the battle is moving away from the intellect and into the realm of emotions and the community's narrative, a story. People decide, when President Biden was a candidate, he said, we believe in something along the lines, we believe in truth, not facts. And everybody thought it was one of his gaffes. Well, no, he has advisors that don't believe in facts. And they just choose, their community chooses what they want to be true. That becomes their truth. They treat it as truth, even if all the facts go against them. And so right now we have, with critical theory and critical race theory and neo-Marxism and the postmodern idea that truth is an absolute. Each community defines its own truth with its narrative. That kind of won the day. So now it's really weird. We have an open door to these atheists because a lot of these atheists now like hanging out with Christians because we still believe in absolute truth and we're still willing to dialogue with the intellect. Whereas Richard Dawkins is being, slammed as being an oppressor. And so it's interesting that we have an open door, but they had their day in the sun, but it's moving on. So I think it's going to be, like the ancient times when the Christian worldview had its battles with ancient paganism, and now I think it's the neo-paganism that's on the rise.
Right. I mean, it's an interesting point because it's like you're almost back at the beginning of Christianity 2,000 years where you have this, Greco-Roman world that is in direct contradiction to the Christian ideas, and you're almost at that again. I mean,
the parallels are amazing because, ancient Greek philosophy was supposed to refute the pagan mythology and all the pagan cults. Yet, a few hundred years after Plato and Socrates, Paul shows up in Athens, the world's headquarters of Greek philosophy, and what he sees are all these altars to false gods. So the ancient rational Greek and Roman thinkers could not refute. Jesus said that man does not live on bread alone, but on every utterance of the mouth of God. So anytime you try to just rationally describe everything without an appeal to the supernatural and to the spiritual, you're going to leave people starving for spiritual experiences. And so Christianity had to defeat the ancient pagan gods. And our message pretty much is, my God's bigger than your God. Right. And the God of Christianity, he sits enthroned, and he is the true God, and he's a good God. But he's a God of grace, but he's a God who judges. And so the new atheists, they butt heads with him, and they lost. But in the meantime, Western civilization right now is being taken over by, groups of people who are anti-Christian, anti-truth, anti-traditional morality. And so that's where the battle lines are drawn. And I'm glad to see that you're on the cutting edge addressing that, because a lot of Christian scholarship, I run in scholarly circles. I'm the vice president of the International Society of Christian Apologetics. I had the Doctor of Ministry program in apologetics for Veritas International University. And I'm telling you, in academic circles, it took me, I think, about 15 to 20 years to get apologetics conference promoters to allow me to speak on what I call paranormal apologetics. So it's kind of like we want to just, in academic circles, it's embarrassing to talk about the push towards globalism. It's embarrassing to talk about the paranormal. And so they just want to just keep talking about the same stuff over and over again. Now, we do need a vibrant, robust defense of God's existence and absolute truth and Jesus' resurrection and deity, and a defense of the Bible as God's word. So I'll continue to do that until I go home to be with Jesus. But at the same time, you get outside the philosophy lecture hall, and the questions people are asking right now is not, does God exist? But it's like, what do you believe about haunted houses? What do you believe about UFOs and things of that sort? And I think the Bible gives us, the biblical worldview has a response to those questions. But I'm really glad to see you as one of the few guys out there addressing these issues.
But I think you're right. I think the Bible does have answers to those issues. I think that it's not being discussed in the church in a very general way. And you're right, they do downplay it in ways, but I think that in the common culture, I would say for sure it's a very important topic. But I think that the new atheists with this kind of postmodern neo-Marxist share something, is that they blame what their conception of religion is for all the problems in the world. So they really lump it together. And I think it goes into your introductory statement about Christianity and Islam, is they view both of those religions as the enemy and cruel, and this whole concept of the cruel father in the sky. Can you address kind of what that kind of militantism, and I think it's all, sorry, can you address that why they view that way, and they're tied to Darwinism?
Yeah, they're basically, they believe that Darwinian evolution explains everything, and now there's no need for God, for belief in God whatsoever. So they believe God is antiquated. Belief in God is antiquated. They would agree with Nietzsche that God is dead. Belief in God is no longer a viable option for thinking people in the West. And so I wrote an article back in 1998, The Coming Death of Western Civilization. And there I talked about how Nietzsche understood that if God is dead, truth is dead, morality is dead, meaning is dead. But he thought this would produce the Superman. Now, of course, C.S. Lewis and Francis Schaeffer, Christian thinkers, said, no, if God is dead and truth, morality, meaning, if they're dead, then man is dead too. It's not going to produce the Superman. It's going to be the death of man. So the 19th century with Darwin was the death of God in Western civilization. The 20th century was the death, us coming to terms with the death of meaning and truth and morality. And I argue that the 21st century is now going to bring about the death of man if there is not widespread repentance. And but these guys, like you say, the new atheists would join with the critical race theories and the postmodernists. So these guys are the new atheists are modernist, and they think, we can save the planet through human reason alone and find all truth and solve all our problems through human reason alone. Well, the modern project failed, and that led to postmodernism, where they gave up on the individual, and now you're defined by your community's narrative, your community's story, and so they go to power narratives. But they are allies in that both modernism and postmodernism hate Christianity, right. And because Christianity has such a great impact and influence on Western civilization, they also want to attack Western civilization. So when they talk about things like systemic racism, they're saying the entire system needs to be replaced, needs to be overturned. And so basically what they're talking about is the overturning of United States sovereignty and the merging with a new global order. And now certainly the new atheists agree with the neo-Marxists today on their hatred of Christianity, but in the process, the neo-Marxists also attack much of the new atheist ideology themselves, so that a lot of Richard Dawkins' conferences were being canceled because he's made some statements, and he's a white male, and so he doesn't fit into their views on intersectionality, and he's an oppressor himself. And so there's a lot of these new atheists. There might be an open door. I know Stefan Molyneux, I think he's an agnostic and used to hate Christians, but he acknowledges sometimes when he bumps into Christians, now they're the only people who understand him, because he's a libertarian, and he's gone on record by saying that cancel culture is a dress rehearsal for genocide. And so there might be some open doors with the new atheists, because all of a sudden, they accomplish so much and they're attacking a Christianity, and now they're getting kicked out of the party.
Right. That's kind of the way it works, right? Who comes next? Who's next on the chopping block? And you're really true. We're on that level of genocide. I think there's a famous 8 or 9 steps of genocide. And we're there. I mean, and you're right. And I think that he goes back to Nietzsche, says God is dead. We killed him, right? So human beings killed God, which led, and Darwinism and the atheism of what these guys produced led directly to World War II and its horrors. So them coming on after World War II and bringing this around, and they're very famous public intellectuals, people I see all the time, Sam Harris, Dawkins, on very well-known shows. You never get the Christian perspective, but they're in part have to be responsible for the present abuses of the postmodernists and the neo-Marxists.
Big time. And I've got listed in my book, there are certain things that they hold to that I refuted in this book. Like, they argue religious faith is blind faith. It's not based on reason. And they claim atheism is not a religion. When my book came out, it has Darwin in stained glass on the cover. And the day it came out on Amazon, it was impossible for someone to have already ordered it and read it. And I got a bunch of zeros. So all these atheists were offended just by the cover of my book alone. And then they pretended that they read the book. And so I got really bad ratings. I had to ask a few Christian friends to read the book and all, but they were so offended that I put Darwin in stained glass. But I argue that if the belief there is a God, if that's to say that God exists, if that's a religious statement, then to say God does not exist, you haven't changed the topic. It's still a religious statement. And these guys are very passionate about their beliefs, and they offer what they believe is salvation or the solution to the problem. So the new atheists are just as religious as Muslims or Christians. They believe that science has disproven God and that there's no evidence for God. They believe religion poisons everything. I would argue false religion poisons everything, but Christianity is not false religion. I put atheism down as one of those false religions. They believe evil and human suffering have disproven God's existence, and that morality doesn't come from God, and belief in miracles is superstition. They don't believe there's any historical evidence for the true biblical Jesus, and they teach that they believe teaching children about God is child abuse. So those are just some of the things that I address in my book, The Atheist Delusion.
Right. And you mentioned this court case, Tarasco versus Watkins, that secular humanism is a religion, and you could probably put atheism maybe as a subset of secular humanism. I don't know. Mm-hmm. But I think that it is interesting that they have this presumption that their scientistical worldview is not a religion. But if you have to have more faith to believe in Darwin's theory of evolution than in the historicity of Christianity and Christ. Would you agree with that?
Yeah. My old professor, Dr. Norman Geisler, and a good friend of mine, Frank Terra, co-authored the book, I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist. And, right now the debate comes down to either you believe in the beginning a miracle-working God created the universe out of nothing, or in the beginning nothing created the universe totally out of nothing. And really, nothing. In order to have potential, to have power, you got to be something. Nothing is nothing, therefore nothing can do nothing, therefore nothing can cause nothing. If the universe had a beginning, and that's what 20th century cosmology has proven, if the universe had a beginning, it has to have a cause, and nothing is not a good candidate. Nothing can't cause anything. And so whatever the case, but it's like Richard Dawkins says that if you could prove your beliefs, it's no longer faith. It's now knowledge or reason. And John Lennox, the Oxford scholar or mathematician, he said in his accent, well, surely now, Richard, you must have good reasons for having faith in your wife. And Dawkins said, of course. And then the whole audience laughed because the only guy in the auditorium that didn't get it was Richard Dawkins. Richard Dawkins had good reasons to have faith in the loyalty of his wife, yet he claims if it's of faith, you can't have any reasons for it. There's no rational aspects to it. So his belief in faith is only blind faith, whereas the biblical view of faith is a faith that is founded upon the evidence.
Right. And I mean, the other thing that's interesting is they're so certain of the scientism or science of evolution, but to really apply the scientific process to evolution, there's a lot of problems there, right?
Oh yeah, big time. And it's unfortunate that we call the scientific method because the scientific method starts with observation, but you can also have like forensic science or crime scene investigation where you things you can observe. Like crime scene investigation. Did O.J. Simpson kill his former wife and her friend? You can't. It's non-repeatable. You can't observe that. So you go do forensic science, which is still part of science, but it's a different method than the scientific method. And that's the way it is with creation and evolution. No human was there to see the creation events. And just as with the atheists, no human was there to see supposedly everything pop into existence totally out of nothing, totally without a cause, to see life evolve from non-life, multi-celled animals evolve from single-celled animals. So you have to use more of forensic science, not you have to go to origin science, not operation science. It's like if we were examining how a car operates, that doesn't tell us how the car was made. And that's what the atheists do. They look how the world operates and they say, okay, that's how it had to come to be. No, the origin of the universe is going to deal with origin science, basically the study of singular events, non-repeatable events of the past. And so there you're looking at principles like analogy, similar effects have similar causes. And you're looking at the principle of causality. Non-being cannot cause being. Every effect must have an adequate cause. And when we apply that to the origin of the universe, the origin of first life, and the origin of more complex life forms, you find that theism, the belief in a personal God, is much more scientifically plausible than atheism is. And I like where you use the word scientism. Scientism turns science into a religion, and it acts like truth can only be found through the five senses. Well, is that statement true? Because you can't prove that statement true through the five senses. So it's a self-refuting statement.
Right. And these guys get away with it, though. These new atheists get away with a lot of stuff. There's not a lot of, I've seen them in public debates. Maybe you've seen other things, but a lot of people just listen to them like they're evangelists almost. So
it's one of the reasons why I don't debate as much on college campuses. It used to be 20 years ago when I make a good point, I could see the audience, most of the audience, college students would get it. And but as time went on, I'd make a good point and I'd look at them and they've got this glazed over look. And then the atheists would make a stupid statement and they'd all start clapping. And you can either educate or you can indoctrinate. And right now, even at Ivy League schools, we're just indoctrinating people in political correctness. And, if I find somebody who works in the trades and has no college training at all, they're more likely to still be able to have original thoughts and do some critical thinking than graduates of four-year universities. Now, you make exceptions for like engineering students. They've got so much math and so many solid courses filled with truth that they have to take that they kind of sometimes get exempt from the gender studies and things of that sort. But when you indoctrinate people, you dehumanize them and they're no longer capable of critical thought. And that's what we're facing right now. And so I think that we need a 1-2 punch in apologetics. I do think we need the rational side, defending God's existence, providing historical evidence for Jesus' resurrection. But we also need to recognize that people care more about stories and testimonies right now than they do about reason. So without throwing out the traditional rational defense of the faith, we need to also come up with arguments that penetrate the hearts of people. And then, of course, with the paranormal side, we need to be able to trust in the power of the Lord Jesus Christ and the Holy Spirit, because sometimes apologetics just becomes power encounters where the Baptist missionaries cast out 7 demons from a shaman or a witch doctor, and then the whole tribe converts to Christianity. And the more Americans flee from God, the less of God's protection we're going to see, and we're going to see more and more of these power encounters and paranormal events. And the Christian apologist needs to be ready to deal with that.
Yeah, I mean, it's a really interesting point, because these people who've been indoctrinated in these universities are going to join the workforce. They're going to join politics. So you're having a whole new generation. You're seeing the leaven of that, or leaven of it now. And like I was going to state, they're like, now I think the number one religion amongst girls in Los Angeles is Wicca. It's witchcraft. Mm-hmm. So they believe in the paranormal. They're not materialists, but they're into the satanic or adversarial side of the supernatural.
Yeah, when you deny truth, and that's what these kids are being taught, you get to pick what you want to be true. And we have collectivism rather than true community through biblical Christianity and through the Christian church. We have now collectivism, where people are not important as individuals. They're only important collectively. So it comes down to you choose which community you want to associate with, and then you accept their narrative as your truth. And so the story I like to give is that I saw a YouTube video of these 3 guys, 3 young white males, probably in their 30s. They were all about 6'2", about 220. They didn't look like they lifted weights. So they looked like regular guys. They had T-shirts, blue jeans on, sneakers, ball caps. They were just minding their own business, walking about a block or 2 away from the University of Washington in Seattle. And 3 little tiny Antifa people walked up and pepper sprayed them in the face. And one of them responded by throwing a left hook and knocking the little Antifa person down. And the Antifa people got in his face and said, "Why did you do that? Why did you do that?" And he responded by saying, "Well, you pepper sprayed me in the face." And what occurred in that event was a clash of 2 worldviews. One worldview, these 3 guys were, they might have been Christians, they might not have been Christians, but they grew up in a society that taught Christian morality and absolute truth. And individuals are important. They have rights. Well, the Antifa people were coming from a postmodern neo-Marxist worldview where, look, you're white, male, you're probably heterosexual, you probably uphold Christian morality, so you're the oppressors, we're the oppressed, and therefore when we pepper spray you, you should either say thank you, or you should just walk on and say, well, I am an oppressor, I just deserve this. And so individual rights have gone out the window. And that's why I've gone on record saying the 21st century is going to be the death of man. This is C.S. Lewis's The Abolition of Man. Billions are going to be slaughtered. Hundreds of millions were slaughtered in the 20th century alone. Right. Dr. R.J. Rummel's research out of the University of Hawaii, and he coined the term democide, death by government. And so, ideas have consequences.
Definitely.
And that's where Friedrich Nietzsche was complaining to his atheist colleagues. You're right. We kicked God out. God is dead. We threw God off the bridge, but he's telling his atheist colleagues, however, we had no right to go through his pockets and say absolute truth. Okay, we need this. Traditional morality, got to have that. Meaning in life, got to have that. Sanctity of human life, got to have that. Now let's throw him off the bridge. Nietzsche's saying if God goes off the bridge, all that goes off with him. And now we need to invent our own truth and our own morality and our own meaning. And
right.
So he was hoping for the Superman to come on the scene with the courage to create their own hard values rather than the soft values like love and forgiveness of Christianity. But I don't think the 21st century is. Nietzsche was right. The 20th century was the bloodiest century in the history of mankind. And he died in 1900. He saw it coming. A world without God, everything's going to blow up. But he thought eventually that would give way to the Superman. No, I think C.S. Lewis and Francis Schaeffer write it's going to lead to the death of man and the abolition of man. And so as somewhere between 170 million and 320 million people were killed, apart from war, were killed by their own governments. And that's not even counting abortions. Killed by their own governments in the 20th century. We're going to see billions slaughtered in the 21st century if there is not widespread revival. That's why I wrote that book, the paper that I presented before the Evangelical Theological Society in 1998, The Coming Death of Western Civilization. That's a chapter, by the way, in my book, God, Government, and the Road to Tyranny. And so people can look at what I wrote in 1998 and compare it to what's going on today. And but I was pretty much laughed at when I wrote it in academic circles. And now I'm getting a lot of apologies from my colleagues.
Yeah, no, it is incredible. Like we're really on the precipice of that kind of movement, and the collectivism has just been a disaster. Millions. I mean, if you look at Cambodia, China, Russia, a lot of that people don't get it that Marxism is atheistic, right? Religion is the opiate. So you have this kind of similarity in contempt for Christianity, but it's also fascinating because in this book, you state that everybody's religious. So they just have this postmodern religion. They have a moral system, but it's not biblically based, and it's definitely not based upon those truths.
Yeah, and we have people who are not Christians who are smart enough to realize, to agree with what you just said, and to say, look, let's not throw Christianity out. We throw Christianity out, it's going to be the gulags and the concentration camps. So a Jungian psychologist, Jordan Peterson out of Toronto, he's basically argued against the new atheists. He said, you want to trash Christianity and get rid of it? What are you going to replace it with? And he said, your views sound so much like the old Soviet Union views that I think it's going to lead to the concentration camps and the gulags. And so here's a guy, he believes that the Bible is filled with myths. Of course, I disagree with him. I believe the Bible is God's word without error. But he believes that those are the myths that teach the eternal truths that gave Western civilization all the prosperity and freedom and health that we've had. And that if we get rid of Christianity, the floodgates are going to open up. You have, David Horowitz, also wrote a book about the left's attack on Christianity. And here the guy's a Jewish agnostic. But so there's a lot of people who are actually arguing, look, when Christianity thrives in a culture, you get freedom, you get prosperity. When Christianity is in decline in a culture, then the floodgates of all kinds of evils open up. And so we even have a lot of non-Christians that are actually standing up for the Christian worldview at this point.
Yeah, I think Horowitz's book is The War Against Christianity, if I remember the title correctly. Yeah. So he's saying, and I think he's correct.
Yeah, so I think he dedicates the book to his Christian friends.
And a former communist, right? I think he was Ramparts Magazine, Berkeley, Red Flag type. Parents were both communists.
Yeah,
atheistic communists.
Yeah, he was a Marxist in the 60s, And I guess he saw people getting bumped off, leftists getting bumped off by other leftists for not being leftist enough. And it caused him to rethink things. And man, I tell you, that little guy is one brave man. I wouldn't want to be his bodyguard. I'll put it to you that way. And he tells it like it is. But these are even non-Christians. Now pray for them, because we've got an open door with those guys. But there's even non-Christians that realize if you trash Christianity, if your culture gets rid of Christianity, the results are going to be incredibly ugly.
And I think, do you agree that one of the aspects of Christianity is the focus on the individual, and that has influenced the Christian political systems, whereas these other ones are collectivist? Have you ever looked into that as part of one of the central components of the Gospels, is its focus on the individual?
Yeah, there is a very strong focus on the individual, but there's also a very strong focus on community. So Jesus could say, the world will know that you're my disciples by your love for one another. And Dietrich von Hildebrand was a Roman Catholic philosopher who was a thorn in the side of Hitler. And when the Nazis came to power, he had to flee to Austria. When they took over Austria, he fled to Europe. When they made inroads in Europe, he fled to America and taught philosophy at Fordham until his death in the 1970s. But Dietrich von Hildebrand argued that atheism and what we would call today neo-paganism can only produce collectivism because they don't believe individuals or human life is sacred. The individual human life is sacred because they don't believe that we were created in God's image. And so people are only important collectively. And Dietrich von Hildebrand says that we all have a need, a desire for community. And it's only in the Christian worldview where we have true community, where humans can come together and share common causes and common beliefs and love each other. But it's based on that biblical view of the individual as created in God's image. I will even say this, that there's no basis for human government unless you believe that human life is worth protecting and that human life needs protecting. Now, human life is worth protecting because we were created in God's image. And so human life is of infinite value. But human life needs protecting because we fell and we live in a world of fallen man. And so any politician who doesn't believe in the biblical doctrines of creation and the fall is either being very inconsistent, or they've entered the political arena not to serve mankind and to protect mankind, but they're in for the power. They're there to enslave mankind. Now, by the way, human government, so the human government is needed because human life is worth protecting. Human life needs protecting. But then once you have human government, it's headed by sinful, fallen humans. So you have to figure out a way how to limit the power of these leaders. And the founding fathers did that by state sovereignty and by recognizing God-given rights and the separation of powers in the federal government, the three branches and a system of checks and balances. And right now, people want to throw that all away. And like new atheists that attack Christianity, but now even like the postmodern neo-Marxists even attack the concepts of truth, morality, and meaning. And so it's the Nietzschean supermen have arrived, and without, like I say, without widespread revival. I wrote back in 1987. I was probably being, I shouldn't have gone out on a limb. I wasn't making a prediction, but I just said I didn't think we could retain our freedom beyond the year 2020 if we don't have widespread revival. And so I think it's more than I think it's more than a coincidence that we saw in March of 2020 government actually thinking it had the authority to shut down the churches. Right. And so this is what I would call a depraved new world, and I think that we need more Christian intellectuals who are courageous enough to take a stand against this stuff. But we got to just not defend God's existence and Jesus' resurrection, but we got to come up with a biblical explanation for the UFO phenomenon and alien abductions, and a Christian explanation, even for Bigfoot sightings, anything that's important to people and that they have questions about. Because these people are, because of the new atheists, a lot of people are rejecting Christianity, but that doesn't mean they're becoming atheists.
Right, good point. Yes.
Man doesn't live on bread alone, so they're running to all kinds, like you talked about, ladies in Southern California flocking to Wicca. And so even the successes of the new atheists haven't led people to atheism. It's just made them more susceptible to neo-paganism.
Right, very true. That's a great way to end it. Where can people reach out to you, Dr. Phil? Where's the best place if somebody wants, in social media or your website?
Yeah, I would say the Phil Fernandes, and Fernandes with an S. It's Portuguese rather than Spanish. I'm half Portuguese, half Italian. PhilFernandes.org. And make sure you enter with an S, PhilFernandes.org. It's probably the best way to keep up with my stuff. And there's a sermon audio button. You could go to sermonaudio.com/IBD. That's sermonaudio.com/IBD. And that gives you access to over 1,800 sermons, lectures, debates that I've done. You can go search my name on Amazon.com. They have about 3 pages of books and booklets that I have in print. And so those are just some of the ways to get in touch with me and find out more about what I'm doing.
Great. And is the best place to buy books through your website or Amazon? Do you have a preference?
The best way is through Amazon. Yeah, we're pretty local church pastor, and and doing my apologetics and pastoring and teaching with all my teaching duties. We don't have this big, organization that is able to handle book orders and things of that sort. So if people just go to Amazon.com, that's the best way to purchase my book. So,
and it's Phil Fernandes with an S. And the title of the book we discussed today is The Atheist Delusion, a Christian Response to Christopher Hitchens and Richard Dawkins, published 2009. Dr. Phil Fernandes, thank you so much.
Thank you, William. I appreciate your work. God bless you, and
God bless you.
Continue doing what you're doing.
I appreciate it. Take care.